Country music has always had its share of tall tales, but some whispers were far more sinister and shockingly real. From drunken brawls behind the stage to secret affairs that nearly destroyed careers, these weren't just gossip, they were the truth. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 12 of the dirtiest, most disturbing old country music rumors that time tried to bury. Brace yourself, because once you know the truth, you'll never hear these legends the same way again. One Johnny Paycheck, the Baroom bullet that wasn't just a story. Johnny Paycheck was never a stranger to trouble. Fans knew him for his outlaw image, but for years, there was a rumor that went far beyond wild songs and hard living. He had shot a man in a bar. Many dismissed it as one of those exaggerated country tales, the kind you swap over beers. But in 1985, the truth exploded into headlines. It happened in Hillsboro, Ohio. According to witnesses, Paycheck got into an argument with a man over, of all things, venison. Words turned ugly, tempers flared, and in the blink of an eye, a gun was pulled. The bullet grazed the man's head, and chaos erupted in the bar. Paycheck claimed it was self-defense, but prosecutors painted a different picture. A country star drunk, angry, and dangerous. The trial became a public spectacle, pulling his outlaw reputation under a harsh, unflattering light. Rumors about his short fuse and heavy drinking weren't just chatter anymore. They were corroborated by court records, police reports, and people who'd known him for years. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, though he served less than 2. Even after his release, the story followed him everywhere, a shadow he could never quite shake. For fans, it was proof that some of the wildest tales in country music weren't fiction. They were simply the dark side of fame laid bare. 2. Tammy Wynette, the kidnapping story. That unraveled. Tammy Wynette was known as the first lady of country music, a voice that could break your heart in 3 notes. But behind the glamour, there was a rumor that lingered for decades, one that painted a far darker picture of her private life. In October 1978, Wynette shocked the country music world when she claimed she had been kidnapped at gunpoint in the parking lot of a Nashville mall. According to her account, a mysterious man forced her into her car, drove her around for hours, beat her, and then left her by the side of the road. The story made headlines nationwide. Fans sent prayers, fellow stars voiced concern, and the media couldn't get enough of the dramatic details. But almost from the start, whispers began to circulate that something didn't add up. Police investigators noted inconsistencies in her statements. Friends hinted that Wynette might be hiding the truth to protect someone, or herself. The most damning speculation? That the incident was staged to cover up domestic abuse in her marriage to George Ritchie. For years, nothing was proven, and Wynette stood by her story. But after her death in 1998, the silence broke. In her 2000 memoir, Wynette's daughter, Jackie Daly, dropped a bombshell. She claimed the kidnapping never happened. According to Daly, Wynette had fabricated the entire event to mask injuries inflicted by Ritchie during a violent argument. The revelation reignited public debate. Was Tammy Wynette a victim, a manipulator, or both? To many, the confession from her daughter was enough to confirm the long-held rumor. It was no longer just a piece of backstage gossip. It was a disturbing glimpse into the personal turmoil of one of country's brightest stars. In the end, the truth, if you can call it that, left fans divided. But one thing was certain. The story proved how, in the world of country music, even the most shocking rumors could be grounded in a painful reality. 3. George Jones, the lawnmower ride that became legend. George Jones, the Possum, was already a towering figure in country music long before the rumor took hold. It was the kind of story so absurd, so perfectly in character, that fans weren't sure whether to laugh or shake their heads. George Jones, too drunk to drive, once rode a lawnmower miles down the highway just to get to a liquor store. The tale began in the 1970s, during his tumultuous marriage to fellow country star Tammy Wynette. According to the rumor, Wynette had hidden the keys to all of Jones's cars in a desperate attempt to keep him from buying more alcohol. But Jones, stubborn and resourceful, spotted a solution right in his yard. Sitting there was his riding lawnmower, slow, loud, and impossible to hide. As the story goes, he climbed aboard, fired it up, and set off down Highway 96 in Franklin, Tennessee, puttering along at about 5 miles an hour. Neighbors and passersby gawked as one of the biggest names in country music rolled past on a John Deere, headed straight for the nearest liquor store. For years, fans treated the story as a kind of hilarious urban legend, too ridiculous to be true. But then came the twist. George Jones himself confirmed it in his autobiography, I Live to Tell It All. Not only was it true, he recounted it with a kind of mischievous pride, as if to say, that's just who I was back then. While the lawnmower ride became a piece of comedic folklore, it also highlighted the darker side of Jones's struggles with alcohol. His drinking derailed shows, wrecked relationships, and nearly destroyed his career. The lawnmower incident wasn't just a silly anecdote. It was a symbol of how far his addiction could push him, even into the realm of the absurd. For his fans, it was the perfect example of a country rumor that turned out to be 100% true. Equal parts comedy, tragedy, and pure George Jones. 4. Porter Wagner, the bitter breakup with Dolly Parton. Porter Wagner was a rhinestone cowboy long before the phrase became cliché. As the flashy, sharp-tongued host of the Porter Wagner Show, he introduced countless viewers to a young, angel-voiced Dolly Parton in 1967. For years, they were the picture of country harmony on stage. But behind the scenes, there was a persistent rumor that their partnership had ended in an ugly, deeply personal feud. The gossip said that Porter had grown controlling, resented Dolly's rising fame, and tried to keep her bound to his show contractually and emotionally. Dolly, fiercely independent, eventually decided she had to walk away. When she left in 1974 to pursue her solo career, fans only saw the polite public statements. But whispers from Nashville insiders told a different story, of shouting matches, hurt feelings, and lawsuits. Those rumors gained weight when Parton penned I Will Always Love You, a tender farewell ballad written for Porter himself. While the song sounded like a gentle goodbye, the reality was more complicated. Wagner later sued Dolly for breach of contract, demanding millions. The case settled out of court, but the damage was done. Their friendship never truly recovered during Porter's lifetime. Over the years, both made cryptic public comments about betrayal and ingratitude, feeding the rumor mill. Then, in later interviews, Dolly confirmed much of what had been whispered. She admitted they clashed often and that leaving was one of the most difficult and necessary decisions of her career. Porter himself acknowledged their fights, but remained proud of the success they achieved together. When Porter was dying in 2007, Dolly visited him in the hospital, and they reportedly shared a private reconciliation. But the truth was already out. The beloved country duo's split had been just as bitter as the rumors claimed. In the end, their story became a classic example of how, in country music, even the prettiest harmonies can hide the harshest notes, and why fans sometimes trust the gossip more than the press releases. 5. Merl Haggard, the prison past he couldn't outrun. Merl Haggard's voice carried the grit and honesty of a man who had truly lived his songs. Fans admired his rebel spirit, but for years, there was a rumor that seemed almost too scandalous to be true, that Haggard had done hard time in prison, not just a short stint in county jail. The whispers began in the early 60s when his lyrics and onstage persona hinted at a rougher background than most country stars would admit. Stories floated through honky-tonks and radio circles. Merl had been a thief, a troublemaker, even an escape artist. For a while, the details were fuzzy, with fans unsure where the truth ended and the outlaw image began. Then, in interviews and later his autobiography, Haggard confirmed it all. As a young man in Bakersfield, California, he'd fallen deep into petty crime, burglaries, stolen cars, and a wild streak that kept landing him in jail. But the turning point came in 1957, when he was arrested after a botched robbery and sent to San Quentin State Prison. He was just 20 years old. At San Quentin, Haggard rubbed shoulders with hardened criminals and even witnessed Johnny Cash's legendary prison concert in 1958, not as a guest, but as an inmate. Worse yet, he revealed that he once tried to escape from a county jail before San Quentin, only to be caught and slapped with additional charges. Haggard served nearly 3 years before being released in 1960, carrying with him a felony record and a new perspective on life. The experience shaped his music in ways no amount of Nashville polish could replicate. Songs like Mama Tried and Branded Man weren't just art, they were confessions. When the truth became public knowledge, instead of destroying his career, it solidified his credibility. Fans realized the rumor wasn't an exaggeration. It was the foundation of his legend. In country music, authenticity is gold, and Merl Haggard's prison past proved that sometimes the darkest truths make the most enduring songs. 6. Tanya Tucker. Teenage affairs that rocked Nashville. Tanya Tucker was barely a teenager when she stormed into country music with her hit Delta Dawn. With her husky voice and bold stage presence, she didn't fit the mold of a sweet, innocent newcomer. From the start, there were whispers, rumors that this young star was romantically involved with much older, famous men in the industry. In the conservative world of 1970s country music, such talk was scandalous. The names floated around were jaw-dropping. Actor Don Johnson, country legend Glen Campbell, and others whose fame rivaled hers. At first, many fans brushed off the gossip as jealous chatter aimed at a rising star. But as Tanya grew older, she stopped denying it. In interviews, she openly admitted to being involved with Campbell, who was in his 40s when she was just in her early 20s, and hinted at other relationships that had fueled years of speculation. Her romance with Glen Campbell was the most public and chaotic. Paparazzi captured them at events, tabloids printed stories of wild fights, and both admitted to drug use during their time together. Tanya later described the relationship as volatile and passionate, confirming that the headlines weren't exaggerated. The Don Johnson connection was less documented, but equally intriguing. Tucker herself later acknowledged spending time with him during her youth, further blurring the lines between rumor and fact. For Nashville, it was a mix of shock and fascination, a teenage country star living more like a Hollywood rebel than a Music City darling. In hindsight, Tanya Tucker's willingness to embrace her own scandals only added to her legend. The rumors that once threatened to tarnish her career became part of her brand, unapologetic, unpredictable, and unafraid to live life loudly. For fans, her story was a reminder that in country music, some of the most jaw-dropping gossip isn't whispered in the shadows. It's shouted from the stage by the very person it's about. 7. Willie Nelson, the taxman's $32 million knock at the door. Willie Nelson has always been the picture of laid-back cool. A guitar in one hand, a joint in the other, and a smile that says he's seen it all. But in the early 1990s, a rumor began swirling that even Willie's easygoing charm couldn't wave away. The IRS had caught him owing tens of millions in unpaid taxes. At first, fans assumed it was another exaggerated tabloid headline. Willie had been touring for decades. Surely he was too successful, too smart to get into that kind of trouble. But by 1990, the truth came out in shocking detail. The Internal Revenue Service had slapped Willie with a staggering bill of $32 million in back taxes, penalties, and interest. The cause? Bad financial advice, shady accounting by his management, and years of neglecting to double-check the books. When the IRS came knocking, they didn't just demand payment, they seized his assets. Houses, recording equipment, and even some of his most cherished memorabilia were taken and auctioned off. Fans watched in disbelief as one of country's most beloved icons was brought to his knees by the U.S. government. In true Willie fashion, he didn't hide from the disaster. He leaned into it. Partnering with the IRS, he released an album titled The IRS Tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories, with proceeds going directly toward his debt. Fans rallied, buying the album in droves, and Willie hit the road for relentless tours, using every dollar to chip away at the massive sum. By 1993, after selling assets and grinding through hundreds of shows, Willie had finally settled the debt. The rumor that once sounded like a wild piece of gossip turned out to be an embarrassing and very public truth. In the end, Willie Nelson's tax nightmare became yet another chapter in his outlaw legend, a reminder that in country music, even the most untouchable stars can find themselves humbled when the taxman comes calling. 8. Johnny Cash. Pills, border trouble, and a public fall. Johnny Cash's deep voice and black-clad image made him an icon, but behind the myth was a man wrestling with demons. By the mid-1960s, there was a rumor circulating in country music circles that Cash's wild lifestyle had crossed a dangerous line. He was addicted to pills, and it was about to land him in serious legal trouble. For a while, the whispers seemed like the usual gossip that trails any star living on the road. But in October 1965, the rumor became reality. At the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas, customs agents stopped Cash and found more than 1,000 amphetamine pills and tranquilizers hidden in his guitar case. He was arrested on the spot. The arrest made national headlines. For fans, the image of the man in black being led away by officers was a shocking fall from grace. Cash claimed the pills were for staying awake on long tours and calming his nerves, but the courts weren't sympathetic. He pled guilty to a misdemeanor, paid a fine, and received a suspended sentence, but the damage to his reputation was harder to repair. This wasn't an isolated incident. Cash had already been arrested earlier that year in Mississippi for trespassing and picking flowers while under the influence, and he would be arrested again in later years for drug-related issues. These run-ins fed a growing public perception that the rebellious outlaw image wasn't just an act, it was his reality. Eventually, Cash sought help, going through multiple stints in rehab and finding stability through his faith and the support of June Carter. But for many, the 1965 border arrest remained the defining proof that the rumors about his drug use and erratic behavior had been entirely true. In country music, plenty of stars sing about living on the edge, but Johnny Cash's brush with the law at the Mexican border showed that sometimes the songs are just the soundtrack to a life spinning dangerously out of control. 9. Loretta Lynn, Love, Fights, and a Volatile Marriage. Loretta Lynn, the coal miner's daughter, built her career on raw honesty. Her songs spoke of love, heartbreak, and hard living, often drawn directly from her own life. But for decades, there was a rumor that went far beyond her music, that behind closed doors, her marriage to Oliver Doolittle Lynn was a battlefield of screaming matches, infidelity, and even physical fights. In the polite, image-conscious world of Nashville's golden era, such talk was almost taboo. Many dismissed it as exaggerated gossip from jealous rivals. But over the years, Loretta herself began confirming details in interviews and, most vividly, in her 1976 autobiography, Coal Miner's Daughter. She didn't sugarcoat a thing. Loretta revealed that Doolittle, whom she married at just 15, was both her greatest champion and her greatest tormentor. He encouraged her music career, pushed her to perform, and believed in her talent when no one else did. But he was also a heavy drinker, unfaithful, and quick-tempered. The fights between them could get physical. Loretta admitted to throwing punches herself, once breaking her husband's nose in a heated argument. These weren't just isolated incidents. She described years of a love-hate dynamic that could turn from tenderness to rage in minutes. And yet, she stayed with him for nearly 50 years, explaining that their fiery connection was inseparable from the passion that fueled her music. When her candid confessions came out, they shocked some fans, but confirmed everything insiders had whispered for years. The perfect country couple image was just that, an image. The real story was far messier and far more human. Loretta's willingness to tell the truth made her even more beloved to many fans. She showed that behind every romantic ballad or heartbroken lyric, there was often a storm of reality. And in her case, the rumor of a volatile, turbulent marriage wasn't just true. It was the very foundation of her greatest songs. 10. Hank Williams Sr., Addiction, Pain, and a Tragic End. Hank Williams Sr. was more than a country star. He was a cultural force. His songs defined an era, blending heartbreak with honky-tonk swagger. But from early in his career, a dark rumor shadowed him, that his back pain had driven him to heavy drinking and morphine addiction, and that this spiral was what ultimately killed him. At first, many fans dismissed the talk as cruel speculation. Hank's public image was that of a hard-working Southern boy who liked to party, not a man slowly being consumed by substances. But as his health visibly declined in the early 1950s, the whispers grew louder. The truth was far more tragic than the rumors suggested. Hank had suffered from spina bifida occulta, a painful spinal condition, since birth. Touring in rough conditions, sleeping on buses, and performing night after night made the pain unbearable. To cope, he turned to alcohol, and later to morphine and other painkillers prescribed by dubious doctors. By 1952, his life was unraveling. His performances became erratic. Sometimes he'd show up drunk, other times not at all. Friends and bandmates later confirmed that morphine injections were common before shows, paired with heavy drinking to dull the pain. The rumors were no longer whispers. They were an open secret in Nashville. On January 1st, 1953, at just 29 years old, Hank Williams was found dead in the back seat of his Cadillac en route to a concert in Canton, Ohio. The cause was officially listed as heart failure, but the autopsy revealed a lethal mix of alcohol and morphine in his system. The confirmation shattered any remaining illusions. The addiction rumors were true, and they told the story of a man who had been self-medicating just to survive his grueling career. In the end, Hank Williams Sr.'s death became one of country music's most haunting cautionary tales, proof that the brightest legends often burn out the fastest. 11. Conway Twitty, the secret family that surfaced. Conway Twitty's smooth voice and romantic ballads earned him the nickname the High Priest of country music. On stage, he projected charm, respectability, and old-fashioned romance. But behind that polished image, there was a persistent rumor that followed him for decades, that Conway had a secret marriage and a child the public never knew about. For years, the story lingered in hushed conversations backstage and in fan circles. Some claimed he'd fathered a child during an early relationship. Others whispered about a hidden wife from his rock and roll days before country stardom. Conway himself never publicly addressed it, which only added to the speculation. It wasn't until after his death in 1993 that the truth began to spill out. Legal battles over his estate brought forward individuals claiming to be connected to that secret past. The most notable revelation was that Conway had, in fact, been married multiple times, including to women most fans never even knew existed. Court documents and family testimonies confirmed that he had fathered children outside of his most public relationships. The drama deepened when those children, born from lesser-known marriages and relationships, became part of the fight for a share of his multi-million-dollar estate. Suddenly, the family man image so carefully maintained in his career collided with a far messier reality. Friends and associates later admitted they'd known about some of these relationships for years, but kept quiet out of loyalty or fear of damaging his career. The lawsuit dragged on, keeping Conway's private life in headlines long after his passing and cementing the truth. The long-standing rumor about a secret family wasn't gossip. It was fact. For fans, it was a jarring reminder that even the most wholesome-seeming country legends could have complicated hidden lives. And in Conway Twitty's case, the ballads about love and devotion were written by a man whose own romantic history was far more tangled than the public ever knew. 12. Paty Klene, the affair whispers that wouldn't fade. Paty Klene's voice was pure magic, powerful, emotional, and timeless. She was the queen of country ballads, beloved for her sincerity and strength. But long before her untimely death in 1963, a persistent rumor swirled through Nashville that Patsy, despite being married, had engaged in affairs with men in the music industry. In the conservative 1950s and early 60s, such talk was scandalous. Many dismissed it as jealousy. After all, Patsy was strikingly attractive, fiercely independent, and surrounded by male colleagues. But some insiders claimed the whispers were true, pointing to her close relationships with certain musicians and producers. The rumors gained weight after her passing, when close friends began speaking more openly. According to several confidants, Patsy was unapologetically flirtatious and, at times, crossed the line into full-blown romance outside of her marriage to Charlie Dick. One of her closest friends, fellow singer Loretta Lynn, hinted in interviews that Patsy's love life was more complex than the public realized, though she stopped short of naming names. Charlie Dick himself was no saint. He had a reputation for being unfaithful, and friends suggested that Patsy's affairs may have been, in part, a response to his behavior. Those who knew her well described her as a woman unwilling to live by the restrictive double standards of her era. She was determined to enjoy her life, even if it meant defying social expectations. Over time, enough first-hand accounts surfaced to solidify the once-whispered rumor into accepted truth among country historians. While fans still celebrated her as a devoted wife and mother, they also came to see her as a fiercely independent woman, navigating a male-dominated industry on her own terms. For many, the revelations didn't tarnish her image, they humanized her. Paty Klene wasn't just a flawless voice. She was a complicated, passionate woman whose personal life was as bold and unapologetic as her music. And in the world of country music, that made her legend all the more enduring.